Hi, so in this video what I want to do is I want to show you how to make this specific website or this effect on this website. So this is the Fikra Graphic Design Biennial, and it's really cool because it's a biennial that's in, I'm not actually sure where it is. Let's look at the location. So United Arab Emirates. And so this Biennial has both an English version of the site and an Arabic version of the site. And what you can do here with the slider is you can actually drag from one to the other, which is really cool. As you can see here. And this is actual real text. I mean, you can select it, you can copy and paste. I mean, there's actual text that you can access here. So that's pretty cool. So how is it made? Well, that's the effect that I want to show you today. And we're actually going to start from scratch on this with a new website. We're going to learn a little bit about the HTML, CSS, and then a little bit of the JavaScript that makes this slider work at the top here. We're going to take some shortcuts. We're not going to make the entire site. I'm just focusing on this main effect here. So we don't want to type over this text, so we're going to make a new project, but then copy and paste that text from the source. So we're going to make a new project, and the way that I like to do it here is by going to Open Folder, going to my desktop, selecting New Folder, and then giving that a name, like Fikra Biennial, like this. And then I select that folder, choose Open, and it opens the new folder for me here that's completely empty. Right, in that folder, first file I want to make is an index.html file, like this. And then I want to invoke Emmet by typing exclamation mark, press enter, and that gives me my document. I'm also going to set the name here, the title of the document, Fikra, like this. And I'm going to open the live server. If it doesn't show up, what you can do here in the view menu is go to command palette and then type live server. If you don't have that, go to extensions and then install live server as an extension. So that opens up live server, gives me an empty page as we are expecting. So the next part is to copy and paste that text here. So I'm going to really quickly inspect that text, and then basically select this content block here and then paste that in. Right, so that's my English text. I know that I have a second content block with the Arabic text, which is this one. So I'm going to copy and paste that one as well. And I'm going to remove a little bit of these gremlins here at the end. I don't really need them. So, and when I save, it's probably the autocomplete will start working, but it's not actually doing anything. So let's make sure that we have everything correctly set up. So also remove these parts. The issue with copy and paste, of course, is that we sometimes forget to copy and paste certain parts, and then the system messes up and thinks we've done something wrong. So this is fine, or looks fine, all of it. But here we are actually missing this part from the body. Cool. So we save, and then everything gets formatted. So looking at our page, we see that we get these two parts below each other. Okay, not very special. Let's do our style sheet. Let's make a new folder, CSS. Inside that folder, make a main.css, and that will be our main style sheet. So we can start with the HTML, but I want to start with setting the box sizing to border box, as I like to do on all elements. So that's what the star is for. And I don't use images here in this project, but I always use max width 100% to have responsive images. And then for my HTML, I'm going to say font family is some monospace. So I'm going to use this one. And maybe the font size will be 18 pixels. Okay, so that's my basic CSS here. And if we save, now in our index.html, we can actually link that up. So we type link, press enter, and then refer to it. And here we do CSS main.css. Right, so we get our text here. Now it's below each other, which we expect, because we didn't say anything specific. So let's focus on our flipper here. So the trick here is that both elements, both the front and the back content, are actually inside one element, which is called the flipper. And that element is then inside of a main element. We need to replicate that structure. So we have our content here, we have our we are just going to make this one front content and back content, but we're going to add the two CSS classes to the same element. So content front content, like this. And then here at the end, where it says Arabic text, we're going to say content back content and remove that Arabic text thing. And so the main idea with this is that we only see one at the same time, right? Now, the trick here is that they're both actually on top of each other, but one of them is flipped. And then by setting a slider, this flipper, this thing actually changes. So this changes the rotation, as you can see here. This is the main trick here. So we're going to wrap both of them in a flipper. And the way that I do it is I'm going to select all of this stuff until this very last div, and then go to the command palette, Command-Shift-P, and then choose this option which is called Wrap with Abbreviation from Emmet. And what that allows me to do is give an HTML tag, and that's going to put the HTML tag at the top and at the bottom, so it's matching those two up. And this one's called div.flipper, so that's our flipper element here. And we do that one more time, like this. We select everything, we wrap again, so Command-Shift-P or View and then Command Palette, wrap with abbreviation. It should be the top one, and that one's going to be called div.main. Right, so we have main, flipper, content, front content, and back content. Cool. And now for the actual effect. The idea here is that the flipper actually will get position relative, and that allows us to put the content elements as position absolute. And what that means is that they're both going to be at the same position. So the front and the back text will all be at the same position, as you can see here. So they're just on top of each other, right? Now, the back content is actually the other way around because it's Arabic text. So one thing that we want to do for our Arabic text or paragraphs is to set the direction from right to left, RTL. So that flips the text around, so it starts here, which is what we want with Arabic text. But then also, our back content, remember our content element here has two tags set to it, so two CSS classes, content and front content, and content and back content. Our back content is actually rotated, and I'm actually going to show this first with the front content just to make it super obvious what's going on. Wait, not front content, or maybe just here at the flipper. So this is the main trick, right? On flipper we have what's called a transform attribute, and transform allows us to put elements in space. Apart from where they are from the layout, we can actually move them around. So there's transform where we can do translate, for example, where we can say, oh, 50 pixels like this, 50 pixels like this, and that actually moves the text. We're not really interested in moving, we're interested in rotating that text. And we have rotate 3D, but the one we're looking for is rotate Y. And here we can give an angle, like 30 degrees, for example. And that actually sort of rotates, but it does something a bit weird. So if you see, it sort of squashes this text. And that's because we haven't set up our perspective project, and we haven't actually set how wide our perspective needs to be. And that's why we have this main class. So on main, you can see that the perspective here is set. And this perspective sort of defines the width of the whole thing. So changing that perspective makes things wider or smaller, or more distorted or less distorted. So here it's set at 600 pixels, which is kind of okay. So I'm going to copy and paste that and say perspective is 600 pixels. And also, and this is also important, we're going to set margin to 0 and auto and give that main element a max width of 600 pixels. So that's basically saying put the text in the middle and then set that perspective. Now, if we scroll here, it sort of looks like this. If we scroll here, it does something a bit different. You see that it sort of tilts more and more. And that's another rule that we have here on our flipper, where it says transform style is preserve 3D, and that makes sure that our 3D is actually not tilted as the content is tilted. So we're going to use transform style preserve 3D. I actually never use this, so this is specific to this effect, I think. It's also not doing very much. Oh well, we're going to leave it as is for now. Then what we want to do, and so we have our rotate here, that actually rotates here. We can see if we change our rotation, that actually works. And if we open our inspector tools in Chrome, and we go to that flipper element, so main flipper, and we change the rotation, like this, we can actually see that it rotates, right? So this is pretty cool. But of course we only want one text, so we want this text to appear when I rotate this between this, and then we want the Arabic text to appear once we're at over 90 degrees basically, until we're at 180 degrees, which is all the way, flipped all the way. And the way we do that is by setting our back content, by rotating our back content by default. Here we're going to say rotate Y is already, transform, rotate Y is set to 180 degrees. So it's already flipped. Now, not sure if we are able to see this. Let's try it. But as you can see, it's still there, and that's because we actually need to hide it when it's flipped, when it's the other way around. And this is a rule that I didn't know of before, but it's kind of interesting to see how that works, is this CSS property that's called backface visibility. So basically when do we want to see the backside of this element or not? So backface visibility by default is visible, but if it's set to hidden, that means that we don't see it. So here by default it's set to visible, but if we say for our content backface visibility is hidden, then we actually don't see the content. Now if we rotate, again we're doing this from the Chrome developer tools, but in a minute we'll do the slider, we can see that we actually have this basic effect here in place. Cool. Right, now for our header. Note that we don't have to do too much with our front and back content. For our header, what we are going to do is we're going to go all the way up to the top, and we're going to make it super easy for ourselves. We're not going to worry about styling, we're just going to add this little slider here. And to make a slider, what we do is we use an input. And an input, if we use a basic input, it's just like a text field, so it's basically for making forms. But we also have this type range, and range actually gives us a slider here that we can drag. Now range has a minimum and maximum value that we can set. So the minimum value is 0 for 0 degrees, and the maximum, as we saw, is 180 degrees, so it's flipped. So this is the name, this is our slider. Now, because we want to be able to react to when this slider changes, we want to give this slider a name or an ID. So we're going to call this ID equals flipper slider. And here we have our flipper, and now it's time for our JavaScript. So we did the CSS part, we did our slider. We're not going to worry too much about the styling of that slider, but we do want to worry about our JavaScript. So we're going to make a new folder, JS for JavaScript, make a flipper.js file, and this is going to be our JavaScript file. Now, just as a test, we're going to do console log, and what that's going to do is it's going to print out something to the console, which is this part, whenever our JavaScript is loaded. As you can see, nothing happens because our JavaScript is not included in our page yet. So we do that with styles. We put the styles at the top of the page. With JavaScript, we actually put them at the bottom of the page because they block loading of the page, so they actually make things slower if we put them at the top. So here at the bottom, we're going to write script and then write source, script with a source attribute. So we can use this, or we can let Emmet do a bit of the work and use this script :source and then write js/flipper.js. And now if we save, we actually should see in our console here, it says hello world. So that's cool. To actually get to our elements, what we need to do is we need to select them. And to do that, we're going to use something that's called document.querySelector. So it's basically doing a query just like we did in CSS, only now from JavaScript, so from our code. And that allows us to pick out elements in the page and either change them or react to events on these elements. So here in this case, we want to react to events that happen when we drag our slider. So we're going to select our slider. Remember the name for that, we use the ID here of flipper-slider. So we can refer to it with hashtag because we are selecting by ID, flipper-slider. This is the same in CSS. If we have an ID, we also would use a hashtag in CSS. Now, selecting by itself doesn't do very much. We actually have to store that somewhere. So we're going to have a const slider, and that's going to store that slider as a variable name. And just for fun, we can log that out so you can see what the slider looks like. So this is this element, right? So it's saying, okay, I have this input type range element. That's a slider. We don't want to log it though. we actually want to add an event listener to it. So we want to listen to something that happens on that slider. And lots of things can happen on that slider. We can click the slider, we can move the slider, we can do whatever. In our case, what we want to do is we want to react to input events. So we want to react to our input event. So our input event is whatever happens when we drag that slider. And what needs to happen? Well, here, this is kind of useless documentation, but it's sort of saying, well, you have to provide a piece of code that I can execute whenever you drag that slider. And the way that we write it is kind of peculiar, but we open these brackets, we write E, and E is referring to the event. And then we write this what's called a fat arrow, which is just an equal sign and a greater than sign. And then we write our curly braces. And here we write whenever happens. So we can write console log slider, comma E. And what that tells us is whenever we drag the slider, it's actually saying, okay, you've dragged the slider, and this is the event that happens. Now, there's a lot of stuff that happens on the event, but we're also only caring right now about the target. So e.target basically gives us the reference to our slider, so you can actually refer to it. And then, very useful, you can actually say e.target.value. And value is the value of that slider, right? So this is what changes the value, right? This is what we care about, because we want that value to be set to our transform y, to our rotation, basically. Okay, cool. So we have that value. We're going to store that value in a variable called value. And then next step is that we're going to select, just like we selected here the slider, we're going to select our flipper element. So again, this element. Now, it's not using ID, so we don't use hashtag, but instead we use dot. Just as we do in CSS. So we're going to say const flipper equals document query selector to select the dot flipper element. And that flipper element has a bunch of stuff, but only thing we care about is its style. So we're going to say flipper.style, and note that the autocomplete is not helping us here. And then on the style, we want to change that transform property. So we just write transform. And now basically what we need to do is we need to generate something that looks like this. So I'm going to copy and paste that just to show you. So it's basically a piece of text that starts with the word rotate y, then open brackets, then 20 degrees, and this should be replaced with our actual value. And then after that it's going to have the letters D, E, G for degrees, and close bracket in this. So it has to have that string exactly, right? And the way that we do this is in JavaScript we are can sort of interpolate, so we can put pieces of string together. And a nice way to do this is using these backticks. You can actually look up on Google backtick character on Xerte how you write that, because I know on a QWERTY keyboard it's just there, but on the Xerte it might be more difficult. So you can find it there, or copy and paste it from somewhere. So basically what we want is we want this piece of text. I'm just going to write it like this. So rotate y, my D uppercase Y here, open brackets, and then 20 deg for degrees, like this. Now the 20 actually needs to be replaced with our actual value. So here we're going to remove that part, and we're going to write $, open brackets, value, close brackets, like this. And this actually gets replaced with that specific value that we got here. So this is the value that we have whenever we drag the slider. And that's our JavaScript. That's all we need. So now we have our slider here. As you can see, it's nicely put in the middle. And in a moment we start dragging, we see that our rotate value changes. And you can actually see it in the DOM here as well. So note that it's adding this style transform attribute to our flipper element, and then updating that every time we drag the slider. So this is exactly what we want. Cool, and that's the basic effect. So we've made our CSS using a rotate y property. We've used position relative to put these two elements on top of each other, position absolute on the flipper. We used RTL text to make sure that our Arabic text is rotated in the correct direction, and we used this very important backface visibility to turn off the text that we don't want to see. And then we added some JavaScript here, which is this code that basically selects our slider, and then reacts to inputs event on that slider, takes out the value, takes the flipper, and then changes the transform rotate y value based on the value that we got from that slider. And that's it. That's how you make this effect.